Hello Internet! So this is going to be hopefully quite a short video about play by email for ASL starter kit. So with VASL, it's a really great tool for playing ASL either by yourself on your computer or online against other people live. But with it you can also play by email. Play by email is quite an old way of playing games. Really had its heyday back in the CompuServe AOL days in the 90s. With its asynchronous nature, you can play anyone around the world without really worrying too much about time differences. At the moment, I'm halfway through a game with a chap in Canada. To play a VASL game live with him, to try and find some time when we're both free, it would be a nightmare. But play by email, we still get to have a good challenge against each other. It's called play by email, but really, any way you can swap files is fine. For example, the game I'm playing at the moment, which I'm showing you, is played really over Discord. We've got a little chat going there where we swap our log files between each other. Now in VASL, to start to log, you click on File up here, and there's a Begin Log File, where you get to choose the name of the file and start recording. Then every move you make will be written to that file. When you're finally done, you can do the same, click File, then there'll be End Log File will be an option. Your opponent loads it up, and they can scroll through the log file by pressing Page Down, or by using this button in the top left to step through. So of course you've got to have a scenario set up. I do have a video about how I set up VASL scenarios, which I might like to check out, but for the real definitive guide, there's the ASL Academy. Neil over there has done a really great series about all the ins and outs of VASL and how you can create wonderful looking scenarios. There's a couple of things you should really do though, and that's ahead of time, when you found an opponent, agree on a naming structure for your files, even if it's just as simple as scenario 01, and they reply with file 02, 03, because you just want to know which file you're looking at and try and keep things in some kind of order. And secondly, with every single thing you do, you want to talk through it. In the chat window up here, at the top of the screen, you can type whatever you like, as you would in any old chat room, and it will also show details of the game at hand. So for this game, we're playing S2, War of the Rats, and my opponent is playing the Russians. As they set up first, he sent me a file with his complete setup and my units ready to go on the board, and his reinforcements ready to come on. So I'm going to go through this. I'm not going to really be stopping and showing you how to play. I'm not going to concentrate on the tactics or the strategy. I'm just going to fly through the first turn or two and show you how you use the log files to make this normally quite interactive game into something that works asynchronously. So he sent me his first file, just a little bit of a chat saying, hello, this is my setup, here you go, you do your part. So for me, I started my own log file where I'd laid out all of my troops. I passed this back to him just so we could have a little look at what was going on. Then I made an extra file to start the real first turn. So this is the third file we've sent so far. He showed me his units, I showed him my setup, and then I cracked on with the game. Start off with the rally phase, but of course there's not really anything to do on the first turn of any game, so it's on to prep fire. And just like any other game, this will be taking shots, rolling dice. But what we are doing here, you'll see, is I'll always be highlighting who I'm using when I'm forming fire groups, so it's really obvious for him to look at. I'll always check line of sight, even though it's across an open road. It doesn't really seem necessary because you know it's clear, but it just makes it really visual for them to know exactly what I'm doing. And I'll write down when I'm doing a fire group, I'll roll for my attack. Now the one thing that makes this different is in this case I did get a morale check on his units. Normally he'd roll his own morale checks, but to save flipping files back and forth every single time you get shot, I roll the morale checks for him, detailing what I'm doing. So here I'm saying to him, doing morale checks from the top to the bottom, and I'll say, yep, that leader pinned, next roll is 447 breaks. Everything you do, you're not only rolling the dice that he can see clearly, you're also explaining what's going on, just so there's no ambiguity whatsoever. So this goes like that through the entire prep fire phase. Taking pot shots, rolling dice, rolling any checks that come up. And then when I've got through the prep fire phase and we're into movement, this example's not very good, so there's nothing on here, but it would be like any other movement phase. But as you will see when we get to the next movement phase, defensive fire can be a bit interesting too. So I've finished that first log file, ended it, sent it over to him, ready for him to do his defensive fire phase. So for this fourth file, my opponent here, he's jumped back in during my prep fire phase to talk about my flamethrower that malfunctioned. And it's just a little bit of banter in the chat window. But he definitely he had to say something, so yeah, so you can have a bit of fun. Again, if I'd made any moves during this point, he could take defensive fire shots against me. Because even though he's recording a log file, he's playing through my log file at the same time, and he can interject with actions saved to his log file, which he then returns to me. It sounds really complicated, but then when you actually go through it, it's really dead or simple. So there's defensive fire phase. He's doing the same as I did. We're taking lots of checking line of sight every time, writing down what he's doing, explaining every shot, making the rolls. When he gets to any time where he's got a morale check against me or a pin check, he's rolling for it. He's got to my advanced fire phase, but he knows that all of my units had prep fired, so there was nothing available for me to do. So he's just moved straight through to the rout phase. No routing for him, no routing for me. So on to the advanced phase. And it's at this point that he's emailed me this log file back. So here in this fifth file which I'm making for him, this was a really quick one. Starts in the advanced phase. I don't want to move anyone crossing this road. Anyone I move out is just going to be put in danger, so I've left everyone where I am. There's no close combat phase. No one's on it, so that passes on. And we move into his rally phase. So a little while later, he's returned this to me. This is now the sixth file in this game. And it starts with him doing his rallies as he was in the rally phase, trying to bring his troops back. Then into his prep fire phase, doing what he can to pick apart my units. Again, any time he gets a morale check or something again on my units, he rolls for it. Well, the dice come from random.org. They're quite trustworthy results, and you can see them. They're part of the log file. He's prep fired all of his units into his movement phase. There's no movement to do, so he sends that file to me, ready for me to do defensive fire. Like before, I'm doing my defensive fire phase, taking every shot I can at him. Again, every time I get something that might cause him to make a morale check, I'm the one doing the roll for it. I'm explaining everything I'm doing as I go along in the chat window. In his advancing fire phase, all of his units are prep fired, so I know he's not going to be able to do anything. Instead of wasting time sending a file back and forth for him to make no change, I just keep playing through. And he's only got one unit that may have rout, is already in a building. Even though it would be his rout phase, I don't expect him to move him, so I just keep going and I do my rout. And at that point, I send this file back to him, ready for his advanced phase. Now he's sent this back to me, but he's jumped in before we get to the end of my log file, because he does want to rout his unit. The one I thought he'd want to leave in the building, he's going back through the orchards, checking for any interdiction, using line of sight to make it clear for both of us what's happening, explaining what's going on, and parking him up in a building much further away from the action. Then he does his advanced phase, and his units step forward a little bit. We know there's no close combat again, and he's going to pass the file back to me, and he's told me what he's going to plan to do in his rally phase, so I can roll his rolls and crack on with my movement, my prep fire and my movement. So into the 9th phase, we're into the second turn at last. I roll all of my rallies as you normally would do, and I roll the ones that he's told me to. It's also perfectly acceptable in a rally phase with this. When you get to the end of the turn, and you're passing it to your opponent's turn, you can always do your rallies first, even though the strict order of ASL says that the attacker rallies, then the defender. Doing it out of order to save a file flying back and forth is completely fine. Of course, if you and opponents both agree, which I think generally most people would. And then again, I'm doing my prep fire phase. checking line of sight, explaining everything that I'm doing, taking any morale check, pin check rolls for them, seeing if anything does break. And then into my movement phase. In this one, I've only prep folded a few people, so I'm going to start doing some movements. I'm moving some people in, dropping some DCs, I'm making attempts to lay smoke. So everything that would normally go on. The one thing you will notice though is there's no defensive first fire at all. So now my movement's completed. There was no defensive first fire whatsoever going on. So when I give the file to him, he's going to start going through my movement phase and inserting any defensive first fire he makes. And if that breaks my units, he's going to move my counters back to where they should be. Generally with a movement phase, you'll say, when you're moving units, you'll say to your opponent, like, if one of my units breaks, can you stop and send it back to me? Or if one of my units walks into residual fire, can you send it back to me? So you can adapt to the situation. It can slow it down that way, but sometimes I'll just say, you know what, doesn't matter what happens. If they pin, they break, they walk into residual fire, whatever, just keep going. It's not going to change my plans at all. And then they can do all of it in one file instead of a bit more back and forth. So here's the 10th file that we've sent. And he's jumped in during my prep fire phase because he thinks that I've made a couple of errors. One of the errors was a mistake. I thought it was an NMC when it should have been a 1MC, so that has affected how one of his units is broken. Another mistake he thought I made was not leader directing attack, which would have changed the outcome. But little did he know that in my movement phase I was going to be moving my leaders to drop those DCs. So we had a little chat on Discord to say, look, no, what you think was an error with that leader was not an error. Just play through my file and send it back to me. So he starts the logging back in the prep fire phase just so we can fix that one issue with the broken unit. And now we're into my movement phase and he's starting to put his defensive fire shots in. So you can see the G7 units trying to line of sight to my leader. There's no line of sight, so he was lucky there. You can see one of his units is now marked first fire where he's getting involved. Again, with my other units that are moving, I'm laying smoke. He's making shots at them which do prevent what happened. In this case, he broke my leader, which would have moved forward, so when the counters jump forward, he's got to move them back to where they were. Now is where we ended the last time, at the start of his defense fire phase, but all this additional defensive fire happened in his log, on top of the log I sent him. So again, he'll start taking his defensive fire, he'll start taking pop shots at me, getting everyone marked up, and then he'll send me back that file. Okay, that's only the first turn and a half or so, but hopefully you can see how you do as much of your turn as you possibly can, ignoring some of the bits where they can interject. You send that log file to them. If there's a place they can interject, they start their log file on top of yours and make those moves inside it, sending it back to you. When I heard that play by email was done on ASL, after playing a few games, I really wasn't sure how defensive fire would work out, as that's actions you're taking during another player's turn. But with this system, using VASL, it works really well. All you've got to really remember for it to be a successful game is to communicate everything. Everything you're doing with your counters, every shot you're taking, be really explicit with what you intend, what you think the role should be. If there's a place where your opponent would normally make a roll, you just make that roll for them. It does mean that your little VASL stats that you can pull up, your little VASL dice stats, won't have the same meaning. They won't split your morale checks against their morale checks. But that one tiny loss for this new way to play is nothing. But yeah, with rolling each other's checks and doing some things out of order, like doing your rallies when you send the file back for their turn, it can minimise the files you're sending back and forth and really speed up play. So I hope you found this a little bit useful. I hope it's inspired you to go out and play some play-by-email games, because it is a really good chance to play more ASL with people you'd never normally have the chance to. And when you are looking at it, when you do get sent a log file in the afternoon from Canada or China or Timbuktu or whoever you're playing against, you're only doing a couple of phases, so you can sit down, you can fly through it in 5-10 minutes, have that little hit of ASL, send it off, and know there's more coming later. Alternatively, if you're unsure about where you're going to move, you can really mull over your moves. You can look at the state of the board and really have a good hard think about what you're going to do without some opponent on the other side of a table or on the other side of a live VASL game tapping their fingers going, come on, go, go, go. And that delay might not just be to think about it. If you want to look up a rule, you can spend as much time as you want flicking through that rule book, trying to be sure you know what you're doing and what the result will be without anyone getting fed up and waiting around. Because when you send that file and he looks at your moves, he just skips through it, and the moves that you spent 10 minutes thinking about or 15 minutes looking up rules, for him it's 2 seconds as he clicks a button and steps through your log file. I hope you found this informative. If any of you do want to play a game of Advanced Squad Leader Starter Kit against me, play by email, just drop me a comment on this video and we'll sort something out. I'm always happy to play new people. I'm not very good, so it'll probably be an easy win for you as well. So, until next time, happy gaming!